What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we are looking at round number 4 of the ongoing World Chess Championship match between Ding Liren of China, the defending world champion, and Gukesh D of India, the challenger. And here we go. In the game, Ding Liren is playing as white. Now, in game number 2, his first game playing as white, Ding Liren did open 1 e4. However, he is mostly a 1 d4 and 1 c4 opening. So with that in mind, how did he open in this game? Well, it turns out he did go for the ready opening with the move 1 knight f3, and this move is in his opening repertoire. He typically goes back to 1 d4 or 1 c4 openings after this move, but we'll have to wait and see what he wants to do here. Now, Gukesh, he does go d5. That is the standard move at the highest level. It's a very flexible move, taking control of the center, and from there you can follow it up many different ways. Now, Ding Liren. Normally, he does go d4 or g3 in this position. However, in today's game, he did go e3. And this is a very interesting sideline. A lot of top grandmasters, including Hikaru Nakamura and especially Vincent Kamer, have been playing quite a bit of this move, and it is very flexible. You can follow up with d4, c4, or even b3. It all depends on how you want to go from there. Now, Gukesh, he does go knight f6, a very standard move. And now, Ding Liren, how does he want to follow up? Well, in the game, he went for a favorite of Hikaru Nakamura. He played the move b3, intending bishop b2 with the fianchetto of the dark squared bishop. Now, here, how does Gukesh want to proceed? Well, there are 3 main plans. You can just go e6 in the spirit of the queen's gambit decline, intending bishop e7 and short castles. You can also go for e6, but playing bishop f5 first in the spirit of the London system. So, for example, bishop f5, h6, e6, bishop e7, and short castles. And finally, you can also go g6, intending bishop g7 and short castles in the spirit of the Grunfeld defense. Now, in this game, Gukesh, he does go for the London-style system with the move 3, bishop f5, very solid, and a favorite of a lot of players, including Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hans Niemann. Now, here, the main move for white, of course, is bishop b2, fianchetto with that dark squared bishop. However, instead, Ding Liren, he plays a move that, I have not seen this move at the highest level in a very, very long time. It's a super rare move, and that is just the move bishop e2. So, Ding Liren, what is his idea with bishop e2? Typically you want to go bishop b2 instead, maintaining flexibility with that light squared bishop. After all, it may want to go to e2, but it also may want to go to b5, depending on what black does. Well, don't worry, Ding Liren has a very specific idea in mind with this move, and he's about to show it. Here, the strongest move for black is probably going to be e6, bolstering your center and intending bishop e7 and short castles. Now, the drawback of that move is you are at risk of losing your light squared bishop to the move knight h4. With that in mind here, Gukesh, instead of going e6 immediately, he does go h6, giving his bishop the retreat square on h7, so a very important subtlety. However, here, Ding Liren, he is not forced to go bishop b2, and instead he shows the purpose of bishop e2. Bishop e2 is sort of a waiting move, and here Ding Liren, believe it or not, he plays the move bishop a3, and I cannot remember ever seeing this sequence of moves played by white at the highest level, and this is super interesting. Here, if Gukesh goes e6, he will lose the right to castle. Ding Liren will take on f8, and then after king takes or rook takes, again, Gukesh will not be able to castle on the king side. So what is Gukesh going to do? Ding Liren playing a very tricky opening, and now he legitimately is fighting for an opening advantage after this very strong move, bishop a3, and I have to assume this was all preparation on Ding Liren's part. All right, Gukesh, in this position, he does not go e6. That would be a little bit of a mistake. Instead, he does find a stronger idea, knight b d7, bringing in the knight, and there's a very specific idea in mind with this move, and we're about to see it. I don't want to spoil it yet. So here, Ding Liren, he just castles, short castles, continuing his plan, and now he is ready for, say, d4, c4, whatever he wants to do. Now, Gukesh, he does go e6 in this position. That is his idea. It wasn't forced. He can go, say, c6, e5. There are many playable moves, but e6 played in the game. And now, of course, Ding Liren has the option of trading on f8. That is what he does. Bishop takes f8 played in the game. But here is the plan for Gukesh. He does not take with the king or the rook. Instead, knight takes f8 is the move, recapturing with the knight, and now he has the plan of going, say, knight back to d7 or to g6, and then short castles. So Gukesh does maintain the option of castling on the king side. That is the idea of knight d7 before e6. Gukesh playing very, very solid so far in this game. But now Ding Liren is not done. He goes c4, expanding on the queen side, threatening c takes d5 if he wants it, and that would reach a sort of a Carlsbad style structure, and I'll talk more about that in a minute if that is what's played in the game. Now, Gukesh, he's got to get his knight out of the way of the king, that way the king can't castle. So, where do you want to go? You can go to g6 or d7. Now, knight g6 would be a very awkward move, as the bishop would sort of be trapped on the f5 square. The whole point of going h6 is to give that bishop the retreat square on h7 if it needs it. So, knight g6 would not synergize with his position overall. So with that in mind, knight 8 d7 is the move. And now, this is the strongest move, but again, the drawback of this sequence of moves for Gukesh, he had to waste the move knight d7, redeveloping his knight to give the king space to castle. So Ding Liren is sort of up a tempo in this game so far. Now from here, Ding Liren has many different ideas. For example, you can go d4, you can take on d5, potentially heading for a Carlsbad style structure. Again, we'll talk about that more in a minute. You can also go, say, d3, queen c1, knight c3, and so on. In the game, Ding Liren did go knight to c3, developing the knight and maintaining pressure on that d5 pawn. And very importantly, Ding Liren, he has not gone d4 yet. That may be part of his master plan to apply sort of a unique pressure in this position. All right, Gukesh, he does castle. I mean, there's nothing else to really do, nothing else to consider. You just got to get your king to safety. Doesn't matter if you're a beginner or a elite grandmaster playing for the world championship match. Getting your king castled early in the game is always going to be a good idea, or at least almost always. There are always exceptions, but it's a good general rule. Now here, Ding Liren, how does he want to proceed? What kind of pawn structure does he want, and where does he want his pieces? Well, in the game, he does take on d5. He doesn't go d3 or d4. He just immediately takes there, c takes d5, and now Gukesh has a very big choice. Do you recapture with the pawn or the knight? Well, it turns out capturing with the pawn is the stronger move. If you take with the knight, then after knight takes d5, then c takes, Ding Liren is going to have a lot of pressure in the position. For example, he can go knight d4, rook c1, maybe b4, queen b3, and so on. And he would have a lot of queenside pressure, and he would benefit quite a bit of not going d4 earlier in the game, as the knight would be very well situated on that d4 square. Now here, Gukesh, he does take on d5 with the pawn. E takes d5. That is the strongest move. And again, we sort of have a Carlsbad style structure. Now, the Carlsbad pawn formation does occur in the queen's gambit decline and other openings. It occurs when white takes on d5 with the pawn, and then black recaptures with the e-pawn as done in the game. Now here, white does not have a c-pawn, and black does not have an e-pawn. That is the defining feature of the Carlsbad. And here, white, his main plan is typically going to be a minority attack. That means pushing his queenside pawns down the board, trying to gain space, and if black ever goes c6, white may want to go b takes c6, trying to give black a very weak pawn on the c-file. Now, normally in the Carlsbad structure, white does have a pawn on d4. However, he does not here, and Ding Liren, he may want to keep his pawn on d2, intending perhaps knight d4 at some point, making very good use of that d4 square. Now, of course, it is Ding Liren's turn to move here. What does he want to do? In the game, he finds the strongest continuation by far. That is the move b4. Immediately gaining space on the queen side, clamping down on that c5 square, stopping knight c5 ideas, and above all, setting up the threat of queen to b3, applying more and more pressure on that pawn on d5, and the queen would be extremely well placed on that b3 square. All right, Gukesh, he goes c6. A very typical move in the Carlsbad, defending d5 in the spirit of the semi-Slav defense. And again, so far black is doing fine, but Ding Liren, he got what he wanted out of the opening. That is a very small pull. He's a lot of pressure, and again, his plan is simple. a4, queen b3, rook fc1, and so on, and maybe b5 or a5 in the future. We'll have to wait and see what it's going to be. Now, here, in this position, the strongest move according to the engine is just queen b3, continuing that plan, threatening ideas like b5. Now, instead of that, Ding Liren does jump in with the knight d4, applying pressure to that bishop. You don't want to lose that bishop. For that reason here, bishop h7 is the move. That is the best square for the bishop. And yes, you could go to g6 or e6, but overall, h7 is the safest, and that was the entire point of going h6 earlier in the game, giving the light square bishop a very good retreat square on h7. Now here, Ding Liren, queen b3, continuing his plan of applying pressure on the queenside. Now Gukesh, it is his turn to move. He has many different playable ideas in this position. What's it going to be? To go down the list, for example, you can go knight e4, trying to trade off a pair of knights. That would be a very solid idea. Beyond that, a5, a6, rook e8, and so on are all playable. However, in the game, he did go knight to e5, bringing the other knight to the e file. And this move, I'm not so sure about. I really thought he would go for, say, knight e4, trying to simplify. And the idea of knight e5, that knight is eyeing a d3 square. He may want to go knight d3 or even bishop d3 in the future. However, that plan is a little bit slow. And here, Ding Liren, he has a free hand to just continue on the queenside. Now here, it is his turn to move. He has many different options. You can go, first of all, f4. That is one of the drawbacks of knight e5 again. White could go f4, gaining space on the king side, maybe even trying to start a kingside attack. But instead, Ding Liren plays very solid. He just continues his plan, and he goes a4. Perhaps the most flexible move here, threatening either a5 or b5, and keeping every square option for both the rooks. You may want to go, say, rook b1 and c1. However, the rooks may want to go somewhere else as well. So Ding Liren finding the most aggressive but also the most flexible move, continuing his plan without defining the placement of the rooks just yet. Now here, Gukesh, he has the option of going knight d3 or bishop d3, but again, it turns out those moves are just not quite the strongest. Instead, he does just go rook to c8, developing his rook on potentially the soon-to-be open c-file. And this move is quite important. Here, if Ding Liren goes b5, that would be a massive mistake. Gukesh could go c5, and suddenly those pawns on c5 and d5 would be extremely strong. So with that in mind here, Ding Liren, he doesn't go b5. That is typically the standard idea in the minority attack. However, of course, typically white does have that pawn on d4 instead of a knight, and that does clamp down on c5 a little bit, making b5 more attractive. So instead, in this pawn structure, with that pawn still on d2, Ding Liren does go a6. Or a5, sorry, a very interesting choice, gaining space on the queen side, potentially threatening a6, the alpha 0 pawn going all the way to a6, with the point being of softening up the queen side. If black then goes b6, then the pawn on c6 becomes a little bit weaker. So Ding Liren having a lot of interesting ideas so far in this game, no doubt thanks to, in part due to his second, Richard Rapport. Richard is known for his very creative, offbeat opening ideas, so this may have been, Richard Rapport's home cooking in his home laboratory. We'll have to wait until after the match to ask Ding Liren to really know for sure. All right, here, Gukesh. The strongest move, again, is going to be knight e4, jumping in with the knight to the very good e4 square, trying to trade off a pair of knights. However, instead, he does go b6 here, gaining space on the queen side, potentially threatening b takes a5, and overall being very solid. However, again, this move does weaken that pawn on c6. It does soften up the queen side a little bit, and here Ding Liren has many different attractive options. For example, bishop a6 is quite attractive, putting pressure on that rook on c8 and guarding the c8 square in general. Then after, say, rook c7, white has many options. For example, f4 is quite strong, gaining space on the king side. Now, in the game, Ding Liren, he's got a plan of being very, very solid and having slight pressure throughout the game. And with that in mind, he just goes knight to f3, trying to trade off a pair of knights, a perfectly fine idea, but definitely not the most ambitious. And here, Gukesh, he finds a very strong sequence of moves. He starts by taking on f3. Knight takes f3. Bishop takes is forced. You don't want to go g takes f3. I mean, okay, it wasn't forced, but that would be not a good option at all. There is just no benefit of opening up the g file in this position. White would need some sort of attack to justify that, and he simply doesn't have a kingside attack here. So, bishop takes f3 played in the game, and now Gukesh, d4, a very strong simplifying move. Of course, you are putting pressure on the knight. If you go e takes d4, then queen takes is very strong, and that pawn on d2 would be extremely weak. Now, instead of that, of course, white does go knight to e2, retreating the knight. That is the best idea. And now here, Gukesh, he does have the option technically of going d3. However, after d3, then knight d4, that pawn on d3 would be very, very weak, and sooner or later it may be lost. So with that in mind here, Gukesh, again, he plays very, very solid in this game. He just trades on e3. D takes e3, then d takes, and then bishop e4, flying in with the bishop, trying to trade off one pair of minor pieces. The idea being after bishop takes, then knight takes, and the bishops are off the board, and that would be to Gukesh's benefit in terms of defending in this game. Now here, rook fd1 by Ding, putting pressure on the queen, and Gukesh, he's got to find a good square for the queen. Now, the best squares are e8, e7, and c7. They're all playable. Of course, you don't want to go bishop takes bishop d5. After that move, try to block the check. Then after, say, bishop takes c takes, Gukesh would have a very weak pawn on d5, a weak isolated pawn. That is what Ding Liren wants in this game, a small advantage he can press with. So with that in mind here, queen to e7 is the move, keeping the pawn structure intact in the center and on the queen side. Now here, bishop takes e4 for Ding, trading that bishop, and then knight takes e4, and then we have a takes and a takes b6. So both sides simplifying a little bit, but there is still plenty of life left in this position. And of course, the main imbalance is Black's pawn majority on the queen side. Now, those pawns could be an asset. He could make a pass pawn. However, at the same time, those pawns could be targeted, and they could be a weakness in this game. It all depends on how both players play from here. All right, Ding Liren. He has many options. For example, rook c1 would be the more ambitious idea, putting pressure on that pawn on c6. However, instead, he does go knight to c3, trying to simplify a little bit, try to trade off a pair of knights. Now here, Gukesh, rook fd8, developing the rook on the open d file, and now a lot of pieces do come off the board. We have knight takes e4, then queen takes, and now Ding Liren, he doesn't trade on d8 yet. He just goes h3, getting rid of any sort of back rank mating threats. A very important, very flexible move. Very good long-term move here. Now, Gukesh, how does he want to proceed? In the game, he does simply go c5. He opts not to trade rooks yet, just going c5, trying to get that pass pawn on the queen side. Now, Ding Liren, he has the option of trading rooks or going b takes c5. You don't want to allow c4. And after c4, then b5. Black will have a protected pass pawn on the c4 square. That would be a huge asset. So with that in mind here, Ding Liren, he does trade on d8 first. Rook takes, and then rook takes d8, and then he trades on c5. B takes c5, b takes, and then rook to c1, lining up the rook with the pawn. And now here again, the main imbalance in the game is that pass pawn on c5. Gukesh has the pass pawn, while Ding Liren has the pawn majority on the king side. Ding Liren's path to victory is targeting that weak pawn, winning it, then going down to some sort of rook endgame with 4 pawns on the king side versus the 3 on the king side of Gukesh. Meanwhile, Gukesh, his winning idea is to push that pawn down the board somehow and try to promote. Now here, Ding Liren, or Gukesh, queen to e5, centralizing the queen and defending the pawn on the c5 square. Now Ding, queen c2, targets the pawn, and then rook d5 does defend. So Gukesh, he's going to have a surprisingly difficult time pushing that pawn down the board. If the queens did come off, then he would have some winning chances here. But with the queens on the board, it is going to be very, very difficult. All right, Ding Liren, g3. Giving his king some space on the king side. He may want to go king g2 in the future, and overall, very solid move. Now Gukesh, he plays a move that really surprised me. I would have expected to say g6, h5, king g7, and so on. That is the standard defensive setup when you're playing for a draw. But instead, he does go f5, gaining space on the king side, and this move right here, this shows you, despite having a very symmetrical position, Gukesh is playing for a win in this position right here. All right, king g2 for Ding Liren, then king to h7 for Gukesh. Again, Gukesh playing for a win. You don't play this move unless you want to, really try and make something happen. All right, Ding Liren, queen c4, blockading the pawn, then queen d6, putting his queen and his rook lined up on the d-file. Now, Ding Liren, e4, an interesting move, trying to simplify, and Gukesh, he obliges. Here, rook e5 is the move. Then we have e takes f5, and then rook takes f5. Now, queen to e4, centralizing the queen and pinning the rook on f5 to the king. An interesting choice, but of course, queen d5 does defend. Now, the queens do come off. Queen takes, then rook takes, and now we have overall a very level endgame. Will either side play for a win? Let's find out. All right, king f3, king g6, king e4, and then rook d4 hits the king. And here, Ding Liren, the king does retreat, king to e3, and then rook d5. And here, both sides, they basically find a way to get a draw by repetition. So, king e4, rook d4, king e3, rook d5. Both sides repeat one more time. And we do have a 3-fold draw, a draw by 3-fold repetition. This is the 3rd time this exact position has been achieved on the board. And according to the rules of chess, that means it is a draw on the spot. So wow, what a game by Ding Liren and Gukesh. And overall, the game is that the match is now tied 2 points to 2 points. Both sides have 2 draws, 1 win and 1 loss. So going into tomorrow with Gukesh playing as white in round number 5. It's going to be very interesting to see how he plays for a win in that game. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here where I covered the unbelievable game number 1 of this World Chess Championship match. If you haven't seen that game where Ding Liren shocked Gukesh with the French defense opening, you got to check that game out. It was incredible. So check that game out, and I'll see you in the next video.